They always said the South Pole could break a man, but I didn't know it had the power to erase him entirely. Dr. Daniel Morgan tightened his parka as the transport helicopter rattled through the icy winds. It had been hours since they left civilization behind, crossing into the endless white nothingness of Antarctica. He leaned forward, staring out at the frozen wasteland below, a place so desolate it might as well have been the surface of another planet. A voice in his head whispered that he should have turned down this job. But what choice did he have? Welcome to the end of the world, he thought grimly. Before we get into the chilling depths of what's waiting in Antarctica, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying tales of mystery and suspense. Make sure you hit that notification bell, or you might just miss the next story that'll keep you up all night. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to let fear dictate his actions, at least not anymore. At 43, he had nothing to lose. Once a promising climatologist whose name graced the covers of scientific journals, his career had taken a sharp nosedive after a disastrous prediction about global weather patterns turned out to be wrong. The media had crucified him, colleagues distanced themselves, and grants dried up. Now, he was a washed-up scientist with a tarnished reputation and a drinking problem he was trying desperately to hide. This expedition was supposed to be his chance at redemption, or at least that's what they'd told him. The job offer had come out of nowhere, through an email from a company called Black Horizon Research. The pay was generous, almost suspiciously so, and the details were vague. A geological anomaly detected deep beneath the ice, requiring a multidisciplinary team to investigate. It wasn't until the second interview that the words "government clearance" came up, and Daniel began to suspect there was more to this expedition than they were letting on. But by then, he'd already said yes. The helicopter's engine growled, snapping Daniel out of his thoughts. 10 minutes to the station, the pilot called over his shoulder. His voice sounded strained, as though he didn't want to be here any longer than necessary. Daniel glanced around the cabin at the rest of the team. There were 6 of them in total, including himself. Dr. Elena Klein, a geologist with sharp features and an even sharper tongue. She had the air of someone who'd been keeping secrets for too long. Malcolm O'Brien, an engineer who seemed more interested in the contents of his thermos than the mission. Dr. Farah Ibrahim, a biologist who hadn't stopped scribbling in her notebook since they took off. 2 military personnel who had yet to introduce themselves, their faces obscured by dark sunglasses and scarves, despite the cramped conditions. It was an odd mix of people, and the tension between them was palpable. "First time in Antarctica?" Elena asked, breaking the silence. "Yeah," Daniel replied, his breath fogging in the freezing air. "You?" "Third," she said, not elaborating. She tapped her fingers against the steel frame of her seat, her eyes darting toward the military escorts. "You know what they say about this place, right?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "It's where secrets go to die." The station appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a cluster of low, black buildings surrounded by a wall of snowdrifts. As the helicopter descended, Daniel felt a strange unease settle over him. He'd spent his entire career studying the planet's most extreme environments, but something about this place felt wrong. Inside the station, the air was stifling compared to the icy chill outside. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, the walls lined with maps, charts, and equipment that looked decades old. "This way," said one of the military men, gesturing for the team to follow. They were led to a central briefing room where the station's lead scientist, Dr. Victor Hensley, awaited them. Hensley was a wiry man in his 60s with silver hair and an intensity that made everyone else seem insignificant by comparison. "Welcome to the edge of the world," he said, his voice gravelly. "I'll skip the pleasantries. You're not here for a sightseeing tour. You're here because something beneath this ice is defying explanation." He tapped on a screen and a satellite image of the South Pole appeared. A glowing heat signature pulsed beneath the ice, surrounded by a web of concentric patterns. "This anomaly was discovered 3 months ago," Hensley continued. "We've been studying it remotely, but now it's time to go deeper. Your job is to figure out what it is and, more importantly, whether it poses a threat." Daniel exchanged a glance with Elena, who looked as though she already knew more than she was letting on. What kind of threat are we talking about? Daniel asked. Hensley's jaw tightened. That's classified. As the briefing ended and the team was shown to their quarters, Daniel's unease deepened. The station felt more like a prison than a research facility. The windows were reinforced, the doors locked automatically, and security cameras watched their every move. That night, as he unpacked his belongings, Daniel found an envelope tucked inside his duffel bag. It was unmarked, but inside was a single piece of paper with 4 words scrawled in shaky handwriting. Don't trust the ice. The first day of work began early, with the team reviewing data and preparing for their descent into the anomaly site. The deeper they dug into the records, the stranger the findings became. The heat signature wasn't consistent with any known geological activity, and the patterns around it suggested some kind of artificial structure. By midday, Daniel had more questions than answers. He cornered Elena in the mess hall, lowering his voice to avoid being overheard. You know more about this than you're saying, he accused. Elena hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the security camera in the corner of the room. Let's just say this isn't the first time the government's poked around down here. What do you mean? She leaned closer. Whatever's under that ice didn't get there by accident, and it wasn't put there by us. The storm hit that evening, a howling blizzard that buried the station in snow and cut off their communications with the outside world. As the wind screamed against the walls, Daniel sat in his quarters, staring at the note he'd found. He was about to throw it away when the lights flickered and the intercom crackled to life. Code Black. All personnel to the control room immediately. Daniel hurried to the control room, where the team had already gathered. The air was thick with tension as Dr. Hensley pointed to a monitor displaying live footage from one of the outpost cameras. A figure was moving in the storm, just beyond the perimeter of the station. Who is that? Daniel asked, his heart pounding. No one should be out there, Hensley replied grimly. The figure stopped suddenly, turning toward the camera. Its face was obscured by the blizzard, but its silhouette was wrong. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent at impossible angles. Shut the cameras down, Hensley ordered. Wait, Daniel began, but it was too late. The screen went black. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the station and howl of the wind set Daniel on edge. When he finally drifted off, his dreams were filled with images of the figure in the storm, its hollow eyes staring straight into his soul. When he woke the next morning, it was to the sound of alarm bells. A crew member was missing. All they found was a trail of claw-like marks leading into an unexplored crevasse. Whatever's under this ice, Daniel thought, we were never meant to find it. The control room was silent, save for the faint hum of the monitors. Daniel's eyes were glued to the live feed from the station's drones, their cameras diving into the crevasse where the missing crew member had disappeared. But the drone footage offered no solace, only darkness. Take it lower, Dr. Hensley barked, leaning over the console. His usually calm demeanor was cracking, revealing a man far more desperate than Daniel had imagined. The feed crackled as the drone descended deeper, its lights illuminating jagged walls of ancient ice. What it finally revealed sent a collective shiver through the room. Something down there was moving. The crevasse yawned open in the drone's camera feed, a jagged wound in the ice that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. Daniel stared at the monitor, his pulse quickening as the drone descended further into the abyss. The walls were alive with strange patterns, shapes that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Are those carvings? Elena whispered, her breath fogging in the cold room. No, Hensley said firmly. It's pareidolia, shadows and ice formations playing tricks on your mind. But Daniel wasn't so sure. He leaned closer to the screen, his brow furrowing. The patterns looked intentional, like spirals and glyphs etched deep into the ice. A voice in the back of his mind whispered that they didn't belong there, that they didn't belong anywhere. Hold the drone steady, Hensley ordered, his voice tense. We need a closer look. The operator nodded, guiding the machine lower. Its lights pierced the darkness, revealing an unsettling sight. Embedded in the ice, half buried and glinting faintly, was something metallic. What is that? Malcolm muttered, breaking his silence. No one answered. The briefing room had turned into a war zone of opinions. After the unsettling discovery, the team had gathered to decide their next steps. Tension crackled like static in the air. "We need to investigate the site immediately," Elena said, pacing the room. "Whatever's down there could be the discovery of a lifetime." "You're out of your mind," Malcolm snapped. "We've already lost one person. Going into that crevasse is a death sentence." "I agree," Daniel said reluctantly, though his curiosity itched at the edges of his resolve. "We don't know what we're dealing with. Sending another team down there without preparation would be reckless." Hensley slammed his hand on the table, silencing the room. "Enough. This isn't a democracy. We're here to follow orders, and those orders are to uncover the source of the anomaly. We descend at first light." The room fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. By morning, the storm had lessened, though the skies remained heavy with gray clouds. Daniel found himself suiting up alongside Elena, Malcolm, and one of the soldiers, Lieutenant Harris. The air in the locker room was thick with unspoken fears. "Ever done a descent like this before?" Harris asked, his voice low. "No," Daniel admitted, pulling on his harness. "You?" Harris chuckled darkly. "I've done worse, but I've never felt like something was watching me before I even got started." The descent into the crevasse was slow and nerve-wracking. The ice groaned under their weight, and every step on the rigged platform felt like it might be the last. The air grew colder the deeper they went, biting through their suits like needles. "Stay close and keep comms open," Hensley's voice crackled through their earpieces from the control room. "We've got eyes on you from the drone, but visibility's limited." The walls of the crevasse began to shimmer as the sunlight faded. Ice crystals reflected the faint glow of their headlamps, but it was the patterns that held Daniel's attention. What had looked like random formations from the surface now appeared deliberate and impossibly intricate. "Definitely carvings," Elena murmured, her voice tinged with awe. She ran a gloved hand over one of the spirals. "These must be thousands of years old, maybe older." Daniel frowned. "How could something like this exist down here? There's no record of human activity this far south, let alone this deep beneath the ice." "Who said anything about humans?" Elena replied, her tone cryptic. After hours of careful descent, the team reached the anomaly. It wasn't what Daniel had expected, if he'd expected anything at all. The metallic object embedded in the ice was massive, its surface smooth and unmarred by time. It was like nothing he'd ever seen. No seams, no rivets, no sign of corrosion despite its age. "What the hell is this?" Harris muttered, his hand hovering near his sidearm as if the thing might attack at any moment. Elena stepped closer, her breath hitching. "This isn't just metal. Look at the structure, these grooves and edges. It's engineered." Daniel swallowed hard. "By who?" No one answered. They worked in tense silence, setting up equipment to take samples and readings. Elena directed the effort, her excitement barely contained as she drilled into the ice surrounding the object. Daniel monitored the readings on his tablet, but nothing made sense. The thermal readings were off the charts, far too high for something encased in ice for millennia. "Getting some weird feedback on the EM scanner," Malcolm reported. "It's like it's broadcasting something." "Broadcasting?" Daniel repeated, his stomach sinking. "What kind of signal?" "Nothing I recognize," Malcolm said, his voice shaky. "It's not natural, that's for sure." As the team worked, a low vibration began to hum through the ice. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew stronger with each passing minute. "Do you feel that?" Harris asked, his eyes darting nervously around the crevasse. Daniel nodded. "It's like the whole place is waking up." Then the lights on their headlamps flickered. "Control, we're experiencing some interference," Harris said into his radio. "Can you confirm our comms?" Static hissed back at them, followed by a chilling sound that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. It was a low, guttural growl, like the rumble of a predator just before it strikes. "That's not interference," Elena whispered. The vibrations intensified, and the ice around the metallic object began to crack. Splinters of frozen shards fell away, revealing more of the strange structure beneath. "Elena, stop drilling," Daniel said urgently. "I'm almost done." "Elena," he shouted. She stopped, but it was too late. With a deafening crack, the ice beneath their feet gave way, and the team plummeted into the darkness. When Daniel regained consciousness, he was lying on a cold, hard surface. His head throbbed, and his suit was damp from melting ice. Groaning, he pushed himself up and looked around. They had fallen into a cavern, a massive, hollow space hidden beneath the ice. The metallic structure loomed above them, now fully exposed. It wasn't just a singular object. It was part of a much larger construct, extending into the walls of the cavern like veins. "Elena? Harris?" Daniel called out, his voice echoing. "Here," Elena replied weakly. She was sitting against a wall, clutching her arm. "I think it's dislocated." Harris staggered into view, his rifle at the ready. "Malcolm's gone," he said grimly. "What do you mean gone?" Daniel asked, panic rising in his chest. "He didn't make it," Harris said, his jaw tight. "The fall." Daniel's stomach churned. "We need to get out of here." "No," Elena said, her voice firm despite her injury. "We need to figure out what this is." "Are you insane?" Harris snapped. "This place is falling apart." But Daniel wasn't so sure. The vibrations had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness. The air felt heavy, almost oppressive, and the faint hum Malcolm had mentioned earlier was now audible to them all. "It's alive," Daniel said quietly, the realization hitting him like a punch to the gut. The others turned to him, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. "This structure, whatever it is, it's not just sitting here, it's active. It's been waiting." "Waiting for what?" Harris asked, gripping his rifle tighter. Daniel stared at the metallic surface, his mind racing. "I don't know, but I think we just woke it up." The cavern trembled again, and a low, otherworldly sound echoed through the chamber. It wasn't a growl this time. It was something far worse. A voice, or at least the suggestion of one, speaking in a language Daniel couldn't begin to comprehend. "We need to move," Harris said, backing away from the structure. But before they could take another step, the walls of the cavern began to shift. Shapes emerged from the ice, humanoid but wrong, frozen figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes that seemed to follow them. "They're not alive, are they?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. As if in response, one of the figures moved. Harris turned and fired, his shots lighting up the narrow space. The bullet slowed the creature but didn't stop it. "Go," Harris shouted, reloading. "I'll hold it off." "No," Daniel protested, but Harris shoved him forward. "Get out of here," Harris yelled. "That's an order." Reluctantly, Daniel and Elena pressed on, the tunnel narrowing even further. Behind them, the sound of gunfire and screeches echoed, followed by a deafening silence. Daniel and Elena emerged into another chamber, smaller, but no less unsettling. The walls were covered in the same glyphs, but these glowed brighter, pulsing in time with the vibrations in the air. At the center of the room was what looked like a pedestal, its surface smooth and reflective. "What is this place?" Elena whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. Daniel approached the pedestal cautiously, his heart pounding. There was something on it, a small glowing orb that seemed to pulse with its own light. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. "Don't touch it," Elena warned, but Daniel was already reaching out. "I think this is the source," he said, his fingers inches from the orb. "The signal, the vibrations, it's all coming from here." "And you think touching it is a good idea?" Elena snapped. Before Daniel could respond, the orb flared brightly, and the hum in the air grew deafening. The glyphs on the walls began to shift and move, their patterns rearranging themselves into something that felt alive. The room trembled, and the floor beneath them began to crack. "What did you do?" Elena shouted as she grabbed Daniel, pulling him away from the pedestal. "I didn't touch it," Daniel protested, though his hand still tingled as if the orb had reached out to him. The shifting glyphs coalesced into a new shape, something that resembled an eye. It blinked once, then stared directly at them. "Elena," Daniel said, his voice barely a whisper, "we need to leave, now." They turned to run, but the passage they had come through was no longer there. In its place was a solid wall of ice, smooth and impenetrable. "We're trapped," Elena said, her voice trembling. The eye on the wall blinked again, and a voice echoed through the chamber. Not a human voice, but something deeper and more ancient. The words were incomprehensible, but they carried a weight that pressed down on Daniel's chest, making it hard to breathe. "What's it saying?" Elena asked, clutching her head as the voice grew louder. "I don't know," Daniel shouted, panic rising. The eye flared with light, and the walls began to dissolve, revealing a vast, endless void beyond. The metallic structure extended into the darkness, its veins pulsating like the arteries of a living being. "This isn't a cavern," Daniel realized aloud. "It's a vessel." "A vessel for what?" Alina asked, her voice barely audible. The answer came in the form of a shape emerging from the void. A massive, hulking figure that dwarfed the humanoid creatures they had seen before. Its body was a grotesque amalgamation of ice, metal, and flesh, its form constantly shifting as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. The figure reached for them, its movements slow but deliberate. Daniel grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the edge of the room, where a faint glimmer of light hinted at another exit. "This way," he shouted. They ran, the ground beneath them shaking violently. The walls of the chamber began to collapse, chunks of ice and metal crashing around them. The creature let out a roar that seemed to split the air itself, and Daniel could feel the sound vibrating in his bones. They burst through the opening and found themselves back in the original cavern, now unrecognizable. The frozen figures were awake, their hollow eyes glowing as they moved in unison toward the vessel. The metallic structure was rising, tearing free from the ice that had encased it for millennia. "It's leaving," Elena said, staring in disbelief. "No," Daniel said, his voice filled with dread. "It's calling." The hum grew louder, and the air became thick with energy. The vessel began to ascend, its massive form blotting out the faint light filtering through the ice above. The frozen figures swarmed around it, their bodies dissolving into streams of light that were absorbed into the structure. "We have to go," Daniel said, pulling Alina toward the surface. "How?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We're trapped down here." But then Daniel saw it, a narrow fissure in the ice, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. "This way," he shouted, dragging her toward it. They climbed frantically, the ice cracking and shifting beneath them. The hum of the vessel grew fainter as they ascended, but Daniel knew it wasn't over. Whatever they had awakened wasn't just leaving, it was spreading. They emerged into the blinding light of the Antarctic surface, collapsing onto the snow. Behind them, the ground rumbled as the vessel broke free, rising into the stormy sky. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a deafening roar split the air as the vessel disappeared into the clouds, leaving only a massive, gaping hole in the ice. Daniel and Elena stared at each other, their faces pale and streaked with sweat. "What now?" Alina asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel didn't answer. He looked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of the vessel's engines still lingered. Whatever it was, wherever it was going, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. And that's the end of our chilling tale, at least for now. If you enjoyed this story and want to experience more spine-tingling adventures, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next terrifying upload. What do you think really happened to Daniel and Elena? Let me know your theories in the comments below, because the truth might just be scarier than the story itself. Until next time.